Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Jackie Doherty, and I'm the Director of Education Outreach for the ARC of Massachusetts. My coworker Diane Hagen is also helping to manage this webinar. Before we get started with today's webinar on the Disabled Persons Protection Commission, I want to recognize and thank our sponsors whose generous support make our education series possible. And those are the sponsors there. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping tips. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ARC's YouTube channel. We will email you the video link and the PowerPoint within a few days. In fact, most of you who had registered in advance, you should have received the PowerPoint this morning. If you didn't, you will be getting it after the webinar with the video link. We will leave time for discussion at the end, so please put questions in the chat or raise your hand at that time if you want to speak your question. We do ask that these questions be general, as we can't get into specific cases or personal information. After the webinar, please complete our anonymous feedback survey. The link is here in the PowerPoint on this slide. It will also be put in the chat. Take a few minutes to let us know how we can make our presentations better and what topics you want us to explore going forward. We really want to make this series helpful for you. Finally, don't miss the third in our housing webinar series on December 17th. We will have a panel discussion about innovative housing for people with disabilities. I don't have that link yet, but that'll be in our newsletter notes that goes out tomorrow. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, today's webinar is about protecting adults with disabilities from abuse. Our focus is on the Disabled Persons Protection Commission, DPPC. We are fortunate to have experienced presenters with us today, Julie Howley Westwater and Victoria Gill. Julie serves as General Counsel for the Disabled Persons Protection Commission. She represents the Commission in legal matters related to the investigation, prosecution, and prevention of abuse of persons with disabilities. Victoria leads learning, development, and innovative projects at DPPC, so her work is focused on strengthening the Commission's accessibility, education, and impact across the state. Thank you both for joining us today, and I now put it in your hands.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I want to thank the ARC for inviting Victoria and I to speak with you today. And I mostly want to thank all of you for your interest in the Disabled Persons Protection Commission and what we do here. The Disabled Persons Protection Commission is also known as DPPC for short. It is an independent state agency with a mission to protect adults with disabilities from the abusive acts or omissions of their caregivers. And we accomplish this mission through independent investigation, oversight, public awareness, and prevention. Next slide, please. So what we want to do today is kind of talk to you about a few different topics. And I just want to say up front, if you have additional questions at the end or there's information that we don't cover in this webinar, we will have our information available to you. And please feel free to reach out to either Victoria or myself or the agency if you have any follow-up questions. But what we're going to walk you through today is, first of all, what is the DPPC? What are we? What do we do? How do we do it? Also want to answer your question about how do you report abuse and neglect to the DPPC? Mechanically, how does that work? We want to talk to you about the DPPC Abuser Registry, which is a protective mechanism that we've had in place since 2021. And I see some of my friends, the Joyces on this call. In part, this DPPC Abuser Registry is here because of the advocacy of many of you on this call. So we thank you for that. And then finally, Victoria is going to talk to you about some of the resources that we have available at the DPPC and walk you through some of the ways to access those. So next, please. So what is the Disabled Persons Protection Commission? As I mentioned, we're an independent state agency. So that means We are not under the umbrella of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services like other protective service agencies. And we are not because the legislature recognized that we needed to be independent to be able to do investigations that actually have folks involved from those different agencies. So we are responsible to investigate and remediate abuse against persons with disability within the Commonwealth. Our statute is MGL Chapter 19C, so sometimes you'll hear our investigation reports referred to as 19C reports, and that comes from the authority that we have by the General Law, Chapter 19C. Next, please. So although we are located in Braintree, Massachusetts, we serve the entire Commonwealth. And I think it's helpful to see where we fit into the state structure with protective services. So if you think of the continuum of care across the lives of vulnerable populations, we have at the very beginning, from birth to 17, we have the Department of Children and Families, and they're responsible for providing protection for children both with and without disabilities up through the age of 17. And then at the latter end of our lives, we have the Executive Office of Aging and Independence, now known as AGE, and they provide protective services for folks who are age 60 and over. Back in 1987, the legislature recognized that there was a gap in protection for adults with disabilities who needed protection during the middle years of their lives. So 1987, the legislature actually created the Disabled Persons Protection Commission, and we have been completing our mission ever since then. Next slide, please. So in order for the DPPC to have jurisdiction to investigate an abuse against an adult with a disability, there's certain criteria that has to be met. And that's why some people wonder why some cases are screened in, some cases are screened out. And here's really the basics of when we have authority to investigate an allegation of abuse. The person must have a disability. They must be between the ages of 18 and 59. The individual must be wholly or partially dependent on others for a daily living need. And that could be transportation. It could be food preparation. The alleged abuse must be by a caregiver. So a caregiver is somebody who is assisting this individual with an activity of daily living. Now, one thing to note is that the caregiver does not need to be paid. It does not have to be paid staff. A caregiver can also be unpaid. They can be a volunteer. We can do investigations of abuse perpetrated by those individuals as well. Finally, they must be residing in state care or private settings. And the exception to that is long-term care facilities or nursing homes. We do not go into nursing homes. The Department of Public Health has jurisdiction there. So that's essentially what needs to be in place before the DPPC is able to do an investigation. Next. So now you sort of know what we do, how and what do you report. So unfortunately, abuse comes in many forms and we see it in many forms. It's not recognizable in some forms as well as it is in others, but the types of abuse that you should be looking for are physical abuse, emotional or verbal abuse, sexual abuse, neglect or omission, and finally, financial abuse. All those types of abuse are reported to the DPPC, and we welcome reports in any of those areas. What I will say is that financial abuse is the only abuse on this list that the DPPC does not actually have jurisdiction to investigate. Some of you may be familiar with the Real Lives Law, which was passed over 10 years ago now, but essentially when that law was passed, the legislature said, DPPC, we would like you to receive allegations of a financial abuse and basically disseminate those to the agencies that you think could best assist. So that's what we do with financial abuse investigations. For example, if we have an abuse that comes in and the individual is a DMH client, we're going to send that to the Department of Mental Health. If they're a client of the Department of Public Health, we're going to send it to them. We also send financial abuse investigations to law enforcement. There may be crimes that need to be investigated. And finally, the state auditor receives a quarterly report from the DPPC telling them what kinds of abuses we've received and what action has been taken on those. Next, please. So where can abuse occur? And I'm going to say, unfortunately, anywhere. We see the occurrence of abuse in places that would astound you. So what we want you to look at is it can happen in private homes. Those are the places that individuals should feel most safe. That doesn't mean that abuse can't occur in those homes. Community residences, residential programs, working day programs. Our expectation is that we have trained staff in those residences and abuse couldn't possibly occur. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are many wonderful people who work in those environments, but there are folks who take advantage of adults with disabilities, and those are the people that we need investigated. It can take place in vehicles. Individuals who rely on other people to transport them from point A to point B. Sometimes the question is, what could possibly happen in a 20-minute ride from, my residence to a day program? And unfortunately, a lot can happen in 20 minutes, and we see abuse occurring in transportation vehicles as well. So it can occur anywhere, and we want you to look at it everywhere. Next slide, please. So what is actually reportable? Like when you're thinking about, when do I report? When I see something, what am I looking for? How do I know that I should pick up the phone and call DPPC? So the standard for reporting suspected abuse or neglect of adults with disability is reasonable cause to believe that abuse or neglect exists. And I am going to tell you that is a very low bar. You do not have to know for certain that abuse is occurring. You just have to have a good faith belief that you think there's a person with a disability who is in harm's way, and we want you to pick up the phone, give the information to the DPPC, and we will take it from there. You do not need to figure out whether it's happening or not. Please report it if you have even a reasonable cause to believe. Next slide, please. So what is reasonable cause? That's the natural next question. Like, when do I know that I have a reasonable cause? Well, I think the most obvious one is when you witness abuse or neglect. I mean, I think in those cases where it's so apparent that somebody is striking somebody or pushing somebody or being verbally abusive, you're going to know that that's something that you should report to the DPPC. The next one is when somebody reports abuse or neglect to you, and that could be that they report that they are being abused or neglected, or that a friend of theirs is, or someone that they know is. And again, that gives you reasonable cause to believe that it's a secondhand, hey, listen, I'm being abused. That person, for whatever reason, may not want to make the call themselves. We want you to call the DPPC in that circumstance. The next one is you observe an injury to an individual. So it may be that all of a sudden you are seeing bruising on somebody, unexpected bruising in areas that you wouldn't normally think, and it's not attached to a fall. And you may say, hey, I'm noticing that there's bruising on your back. What happened? And there's no kind of reasonable explanation for that. That's a reason that's reasonable cause to think, what? There's no good reason I can think of for this to be occurring on its own. I want somebody to take a look at it just to make sure that this person is safe. The next is changes in mood or behavior of an individual. Now, oftentimes, especially folks who have communication challenges, the way they express that something may be happening to them is a change in their mood. You may see that somebody is more behavioral and they're not normally that way. They're normally very happy and want to go to a day program. They're happy to go to their work setting, and all of a sudden there's a reluctance to do that. That may be because there's somebody at that setting who is abusing that individual. And the only way that they're sort of able to express that and try to make somebody notice that is a change in behavior. So if you see a sudden change of behavior and you know an individual is not normally like this, you know what? Make a phone call and give us a call, and we'll kind of walk you through some of the questions. We'll get the information and let us decide whether that's something that we need to look into. And the last is just other evidence. You may stumble across a record or a document, and now with phones everywhere, you may see a photograph that seems inappropriate to you. It's on a staff member's phone, and you're like, why would they have a picture of an individual, in their bedroom, in their bed? There's something that doesn't sit right with me. That's another reasonable cause to call the DPPC. Next, please. So now that you know what we are and you have a sense of when you have reasonable cause to call, how do you actually do it? So there's two ways to report abuse, essentially. We have a 24-hour hotline. Our hotline is manned by actual individuals who you will get a real person at the other end of that phone, and that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a deaf and hard of hearing callers there's a mass relay system that can be used for that. And when you call the DPPC, you will get a live person on the phone, and they're going to ask you some questions about why are you calling, what has occurred. And some of those questions you may not know the answers to, and that's fine. What we're trying to do is get as much information upfront from the reporter to determine what we can do with that information. Now, the other way you can file an abuse report is online, and you can access the DPPC abuse report on our website. We do say in the case of an emergency, the first thing that you should do, obviously, is call 911, call the local police, follow up with a phone call to the DPPC. And we ask that you don't do emergency type situations in an online capacity, because that's not monitored as our 24-hour operation hotline is. But that's certainly a way that you can send us reports, and we're going to process them in exactly the same way. Next slide, please. So what happens when we get a report? You are going to actually speak to somebody on the hotline, and they're going to walk you through a series of questions. The types of abuse that you're reporting, what makes you think that it's abusive? Where is the individual located? The first thing that we want to assess for is risk. So right out of the gate, our operator is going to make sure that this person that you're concerned about doesn't need immediate protection. That would be designated an emergency on our part, and we at the DPPC would figure out exactly what to do to protect that person immediately. If it's not an emergency, the next thing that we're going to do is determine if it falls within DPP's jurisdiction. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, Chapter 19C is what gives us our authority, and that criteria that I spoke about, it has to be a person with a disability. They must be between the ages of 18 and 59 and being assisted with an activity of daily living by a caregiver. So once we have figured out whether that is in our jurisdiction, we then decide whether we screen that case in or we're going to assign it. We may screen it in and assign it to our own investigator at DPPC, or we're also able to assign it to investigators at DDS, the Department of Mental Health, and Mass Ability, depending on the type of disability, because they have expertise with those particular individuals, and we work very closely with them in doing our investigations. The other thing that our intake unit does is we receive calls seeking information about services. We do our best to have a list of resources if you're looking for a wheelchair placard or information about where do I go if I need legal assistance on housing. We do our absolute best to provide callers with resources that we can kind of point them in the right direction if we're not the person that should be handling that matter. Next, please. So I just mentioned a little bit about how a report is screened. So you've talked to the intake specialist, and they've decided whether we can screen it in, and the DPPC is going to do an investigation because it meets our criteria, or whether we're going to send that to another agency that we think can best help in that situation. In addition to that, we are so fortunate at the DPPC to have a state police detective unit attached to our agency. They actually work here next to my office. They're physically located with us. And it consists of a sergeant and 4 state troopers. And one of the wonderful parts of this partnership, and it's by law, is that when we receive this intake, you've called us and you've provided us all this information. Once we've created an intake, one of our state troopers will look at all the information that we've collected from you, and they decide whether they think a crime may have occurred. And if so, that state police trooper will send that intake to the district attorney in the location where the alleged crime has possibly occurred. And in that way, when you've called the DPPC, we have almost immediately funneled that into the law enforcement system as well. And the state police will send it to the district attorneys. We have memorandums of understanding with all the 11 district attorneys here. And if the criminal element is present and they decide to do an investigation, we will hopefully do a joint investigation. And there's lots of benefits to that because we're able to reduce the trauma to our victims when we're working together in those cases. The one thing that I will talk about a little bit on a couple of slides going forward is our sexual assault response team. And they are just an amazing group of people who also take a look at the report that you've made. And if there's a sexual allegation, they provide resources to the victim to assist them in being able to heal from the trauma. And I'll introduce you to that team in just a moment. And finally, the other agencies that we work with, I mentioned DDS, DMH, Massability, will also send a case to DCF or AGE. So if you call us, we're a no wrong door. If you pick up the phone and you call the DPPC and your victim is actually 16 years old, we're not going to tell you know what, call DCF, here's the phone number. We're actually going to take your information. We're going to do a full report on that, and then we will send that to the DCF because we know it's in their jurisdiction. So one of the things that we pride ourselves in is if somebody has gone through the trouble of contacting the DPPC, it's sometimes a very difficult phone call to make for people. We're going to take your information and we are going to do our very best to make sure that the right agency receives that. Next slide, please. So what happens after a report is received? So if it's in DPP's jurisdiction, we're going to open an abuse investigation. And you will not necessarily know whether that investigation is open or not. And I know sometimes people say, how do I know if there's an investigation going, or what happened to the call that I made? And what we do is if you are a person involved in the investigation, you've reported it, you're the alleged victim, the alleged abuser, you're a guardian, what you can do is you can request to the DPPC, there's a records request right on our website that you can make a records request and say, hey, DPPC, I would like any information that you have on me. And what happens is if there's an open investigation, you will get a letter that says if the investigation is pending, we'll give you a copy of the report at the end. If not, you may get a copy of an intake that you were involved in. That's your personal information. All of these documents will be redacted because our information is confidential. So you will receive all the information that you're entitled to, but there will be redactions in some of the documents that we send out. And in part, that's to protect everybody who's involved in our system. If it's not in DPPC's jurisdiction, like I said, we will do our absolute best to be able to send that to a state agency that can assist you with your concern. Next, please. So I mentioned the DPP sexual assault response team, and we are very proud of this initiative that we have here at the DPPC. It's very rare to have this as part of an agency such as ours, and it is comprised of a group of individuals that do navigational services. So as I mentioned, when a case is called into the DPPC, if one of the allegations is sexual in nature, we have peer support leaders who I'm going to show you a slide that's going to give you a visual of who they are. And they work with navigators to reach out to folks saying, hey, listen, I've had a similar experience. I found peer support really helpful and valuable and healing. Here are some resources that you may be interested in. And we have navigators that assist in connecting folks who have been sexually abused or assaulted with resources that will help them and that are able to work with their disabilities. And one of those things is a clinical matching program. So what we've done is we have gone statewide and we've trained people on how to work with folks who have a variety of disabilities when they have been sexually assaulted. Years ago, we realized that there were so few people who felt confident to work with folks who had disabilities, particularly intellectual and developmental disabilities, in helping them work through the trauma. And we feel like we've made great strides towards getting access to trauma services for persons with disabilities through this SAR team. And finally, there's an advisory council on this team. It's comprised of folks with disabilities, advocates. We have doctors, we have social workers, we have people that work in finance to be able to say, okay, how can we as professionals advise this team in ways to reach this population more effectively? Next slide, please. So here is honestly the heart and soul of the SAR team. These are our peer support leaders, and they are folks who themselves have experienced sexual abuse and have made it their mission to reach out to others who are experiencing that kind of trauma and try to help them. And what they say is they work towards positivity, hope, and empowerment. And we have Leanne, Will, and Courtney. We also have Patty Portieri, who's an advisor to this team. And I can't say enough how proud we are to have this team as part of the DPPC, and just how fortunate the rest of us feel to have these brave individuals who are willing to kind of really put themselves out there to be able to support others who are in need at this time. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to talk about is the DPPC's Abuser Registry. And as I said, this is an additional level of protection, and it's been operational since July 31 of 2021. And it was based on Nikki and Dana's law passed in 2020. And I'm delighted to see the Joyces on this call, because without them and many others like them, and the ARC in particular, and all the advocates that pushed for this legislation, it took a very, very long time for this to pass. We have had an abuser registry operational since the end of July of 2021. And this registry protects individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Essentially, what it does, it bars, which means it prevents care providers with a substantiated finding of registrable abuse from working with persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I want to just explain what the limitation is. This was a huge step forward. Incredible work has gone into this, and I think the Abuser Registry is working very well at the moment. However, all of us recognized that it was going to have some limitations. So right now, it only protects people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Only caregivers, who are then called care providers, working with that population, can be placed on the Abuser Registry. Next slide, please. So because this is essentially a do not hire, the Abuser Registry really needed to have a lot of due process mechanisms included within it. And that honestly was some of the reason it took a long time to get this legislation passed, because folks at the other end of this, the alleged abusers, said, hey, if you are taking my right to be employed in this particular human services field, I need an opportunity to challenge the findings. And that's what the due process does. So the registrable abuser has the right to petition DPPC to challenge the initial findings. So when they get substantiated for registrable abuse, they have the right to say, hey, DPPC, I think you got it wrong. I'm going to tell you why. And they file a petition. The DPPC then looks at that and decides whether we support the finding by the investigator. And the other thing that we look at is whether that individual has made a case for themselves that even if they have been substantiated for a finding of registrable abuse, they think that they should be excluded from the registry. And they have to make a case for themselves as to why that is. And we look at what was the injury to the victim and what were the circumstances behind this. Is this an isolated incident? Could it be prevented from happening by training? Is this individual remorseful of what happened? And we weigh the factors to decide whether we think it's safe for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities to receive services from this individual. If we have decided that this substantiation is going to stand, and no, you have not provided information that satisfies our analysis of whether you should be placed on the abuser registry, we're going to put you on the registry. Again, the individual has a right to challenge that before their name goes on the registry. And that challenge goes to the Division of Administrative Law Appeals, which is, again, an independent agency who takes a look at what we've done in our investigation and permits the alleged abuser, the registrable alleged abuser, and the DPPC to provide an evidentiary hearing. So we get to go up to DALA and we get to present witnesses. The registered abuser also gets to present witnesses. And the Division of Administrative Law Appeals makes a decision of whether they uphold the substantiation of registrable abuse and whether that individual should, in fact, be placed on the registry. And finally, there is a further judicial review that people can avail themselves on if they are unhappy with the final decision at the Division of Administrative Law Appeals. So as you can see, there's a lot that needs to happen before a name actually gets on to the abuser registry in those cases where the abuser challenges it. So that can take a little bit of a time. So sometimes there is a lag between when a case has been substantiated and when a name actually gets on the abuser registry. And that's because of the due process considerations that we're required to allow people to avail themselves of. So next question, please. Excuse me, next slide, please. And I'll try to answer these questions as I go. I'll answer them as I go through the presentation. And if I don't, I will go back. So this is not an open registry. It is not open to the public. It's open to the employers. So what I mean by employers are Department of Developmental Services and vendors who are getting licensed, contracted, or receiving funding from DDS. And they are actually employing folks to work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So here's how it works. Prior to hiring a prospective employee, an employer is required by law, thanks to Nikki and Dana's law, to actually check the abuser registry to ensure that the individual is not listed. If that name pops up on the registry, it is a do not hire, which is why there are so many due process considerations with this registry. Not only can an employer not hire an individual, but if they have for some reason done a check of the registry and they realize that they have an individual currently in their employ that is now listed on the abuser registry, they need to terminate that individual. Now, the one thing that I actually think works as a deterrent in a lot of ways is that the employers need written consent of an employee or a prospective employee to search the abuser registry. So, for example, if you go in and you are applying for a job, and one of the criteria is, okay, I need you to sign this form. We need to make sure that your name isn't listed on the abuser registry. If that individual declines to sign the form, no job. It ends there. So in some ways, there are folks, if they know their name is on the registry, they're going to be, they're going to at least know that that's going to be checked and they're not going to get the job. So we think there's a pretty good deterrent impact in with that as well. Next, please. Okay, so before I talk about the resources, I'm going to just hand it over to, before I hand it over to Victoria, I just want to answer some of the questions that I saw in the chat. There is not a way that you as individuals can access the abuser registry. It's confidential information. Employers have access to it. It's done through a portal. If you are a victim in a case, you will receive information about the status of your case, but anybody on this call can't just go into the abuser registry and get that information. And we have a whole presentation on how the abuser registry works for employers that we're going to be working with ARC to present at some point. And I think the other question, is reporting it out allowed anonymously? Yes, and we will accept any kind of reporting. You do not need to leave your name. It helps us because we may have to get back to you with some additional questions, but we do not require that you provide us, so you can certainly do it anonymous. Why is it limited until age 59? Because at age 60, that's the agency that picks up protective services for folks who are over 59. People may fear retribution from an abusive coworker and not report if they need to identify themselves. Again, if there's a real fear of that, you can report anonymously. There is also, you cannot be retaliated against for filing an abuse report, and we actually will do a retaliation investigation if you allege that that's the case. So I think what I will do right now in the interest of time, I think I'm going to hand it over to Victoria so she has enough time to go through her presentation, and then we can go back to some of these questions if we have time at the end. I think that may work best. So at this point, I am delighted to hand it over to my colleague, Victoria Gill, who's going to talk to you about some of the resources we have here at DPPC.
Thank you so much, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Julie mentioned, my name is Victoria Gill, and I serve as the Director of Learning, Development, and Innovative Projects for the DPPC. In L&D, our mission is simple. We use education, awareness, and meaningful collaboration to prevent the abuse and neglect of adults with disabilities. We also partner with community providers, lead innovative initiatives, and offer some professional development and outreach. All of this to strengthen prevention, improve practices, and support safer outcomes for adults with disabilities in Massachusetts. Over the past year especially, we've really entered a new era of communication and outreach at the DPPC, and I'm really excited to be here today to share some of our exciting projects with you. We collaborated with nearly a dozen subject matter experts and project partners on some of these initiatives. Each organization listed here played a vital role by contributing expertise or lived experience or creative insight to help shape the direction and impact of our work. Together, these partnerships certainly form the backbone of our innovation efforts over the past year. And in the next few slides, I'll walk you through what each one of these initiatives were. Featured here, you'll see our new logo. This represents the foundation of our bold rebrand, which has impacted our website, our materials, and our tangible pieces like magnets or keychains that you may be familiar with. And it's certainly expanded how we serve and protect adults with disabilities. Over the past year, we have, for example, fully redesigned our website and kept accessibility in mind. We have created new public-facing educational materials and produced an APS video series. We have also released our newest app, S2, launched our Abuse is Real public awareness campaign, and expanded our digital presence with 4 new social media channels. Our new website, dppcmass.gov, reflects our refreshed brand identity. What you're seeing now is a quick tour of our resources section. This is what we consider our central hub for videos, printable materials, and information on recognizing and reporting abuse, especially. Reporting abuse online, as you saw in one of Julie's previous slides, is now more visible and easier to navigate than ever, making it faster for families and providers to find exactly what they need. I would encourage you to explore all of our new printable materials that can be found on our website. We even have our abuse reporting hotline poster available for on-demand printing now, again, in the resources section. That is available along with other informational materials about abuse reporting, the Abuser Registry, mandated reporters, and the DPPC and its affiliates. Additionally, you can register for one of our live virtual trainings. We host these trainings twice a month, and they are available to community members as well as providers. If there are any providers out in the audience, in case you didn't know, you can request that the L&D unit at the DPPC comes out and delivers an in-person training specifically for your agency, or even virtually if you would prefer. And we're also happy to tailor any custom trainings that you think may benefit your organization as well. You can find our email address on our website, again, in the resources section, if you're interested in connecting. I'd be happy to schedule training with you. Another exciting project we worked on this year was the APS video series. On this screen, you'll see one of our APS training videos playing in the background here. This series introduces viewers to Adult Protective Services, or APS, in Massachusetts, and it also trains investigators on how to conduct trauma-informed interviews with adults who have IDD, autism, Alzheimer's and related dementias, as well as adults who use AAC devices. Each video in this series features survivor voices, expert testimony, and mock interviews based on real cases. The series itself is grounded in the DPPC's Listen method. Again, if you want more information, you can find it in our resources section on our website, specifically related to the Listen method. And you can also find the full APS video series on our website and also our YouTube channel. This video series in particular certainly served to strengthen the way investigators support survivors. And the next project we'll talk about shifts the focus squarely to supporting survivors directly through our newest app, S2, Self-Care for Survivors. If you didn't know, we have 2 apps. Our first app is called R3, or Recognize, Report, and Respond. This app was envisioned by Patty Q. You may remember Julie referencing Patty Q. Patty Q served as a peer support leader for several years before moving into her current role as project advisor. And her vision was to give adults with IDD the language and educational tools to recognize, understand warning signs, and also know how to report abuse. Abuse reporting can even be done directly through the R3 app. Please do check it out if you haven't already. And of course, we wanted to build on the success of that app. Patty had envisioned a second app specifically for this purpose, S2, the Self-Care for Survivors. This app also was co-designed with the University of Rhode Island, as well as Mass Advocates Standing Strong. And the app really shifts the focus from R3's prevention and reporting to healing and wellness for survivors. This app includes avatar sidekicks inspired by DPPC's peer support leaders, which you just learned a little bit about. And they also guide users through 6 interactive activity rooms, ranging from creativity and music to mindfulness and relaxation. Representation was, of course, important in the selection of these avatars, and our project partners at Mass Advocates Standing Strong played a major role in the avatar selection process. They really helped us bring bring to life the avatar collection you'll find in the app today. That's my favorite right there on the screen. Every part of S2 was designed to give adults with disabilities accessible, self-guided tools for processing trauma and also for practicing self-care. Another thing that we partnered with Mass Advocates with was to produce a neurodiversity-informed mindfulness series called the Zen Zone. For this series, our project at Mass helped us co-author the scripts. They served as narrators, and they also served as the on-screen talent for the entire series. The Zen Zone itself is a great tool for independent relaxation, but can also be used as a tool for co-regulation with your loved one and also in small groups. The Zen Zone is accessible through the activity room in the S2 app, but it is also available on our YouTube channel. And our good old resources tab on our website has all the information you will need for downloading both apps. On screen now, you'll see a slideshow of our campaign graphics from our first statewide public awareness campaign, Abuse is Real. Recognize, empower, ask, and listen. This campaign highlights physical, sexual, financial, verbal, and emotional abuse, as well as neglect. Each message in the campaign is truly survivor-centered and designed for use across Massachusetts communities. You'll see these visuals on the screen here, also in our social media reels and in some of our printable outreach materials. They're already helping raise awareness, encouraging reporting, and inspiring community action. If you would like to support the campaign, you can also find these yourself, again, on our website, Resources tab, and you can print them directly from there and post them in as many public places as you can find. We'll appreciate it. To amplify our reach even above and beyond the public awareness campaign, we've launched new social media channels as well. Here you see a screen recording scrolling through our Facebook page because now DPPC has an active Facebook presence or active presence across 4 different platforms: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Across these channels, we're sharing our APS video series clips, some Abuse is Real campaign content, and additional helpful resources on recognizing and reporting abuse. Our goal is to meet families, to meet the general public, providers, to meet mandated reporters exactly where they already are online. And our hope is that by using social media in this way, we're expanding awareness, driving more engagement, and reinforcing DPPC's mission of protecting adults with disabilities. Collectively, these projects reflect our commitment to innovation and inclusion as essential elements of prevention. Working alongside so many project partners has allowed us to expand both our reach as well as our impact. And we've found through using inclusive media and communication approaches, we're working to drive stronger abuse prevention and elevate survivor empowerment. In the months ahead, we are planning to continue growing our campaigns, strengthening some of our tools, and continue to deepen our engagement with the Commonwealth. It's important to note you too can begin putting these tools into action today. Please do share our videos, point people to our website, download and promote the apps, and use our campaign materials within your own communities and programs to help protect and empower adults with disabilities. We really appreciate that you chose to spend your time with us today. And please feel free to scan these QR codes on screen for direct access, both to our website or to join our mailing list if you're interested. In a minute or two, I will be dropping some direct links in the chat, and those are for some of the resources that I discussed today. Please also don't hesitate to reach out to L&D with any questions, resource needs, or for scheduling a training. And thank you again for choosing to spend your time with us today.
Thank you both for that informative presentation. I think we can have a few minutes that we can try to grab some of the questions that maybe weren't answered as part of the presentation.
I am happy to do that, Jackie. If you want me to just sort of jog through some of the questions in the
Well,
chat.
I think Diane and I can try to help with that. I know you did answer some of the questions that you saw. So we have a couple of questions from Dottie. Once an alleged incident of abuse is reported, what is the specific length of time within which the investigation or initial response must occur?
So it depends. For an initial response in an emergency, it has to be done immediately. There has to be some sort of response, as I talked about the risk level. And in non-emergency cases, there must be a response within 10 days. The investigations we strive to complete within 45 days from being assigned. However, as you can imagine, there are often a lot of complicated activities that need to be done during those investigations. We need to retain medical records, which can oftentimes take time. We need access to witnesses. Sometimes folks are on vacation. We have a critical witness that isn't available to speak to. So that can take definitely longer, but we like to keep the 45 days as the time frame because that's what we are shooting for.
Great. And if DPPC receives multiple reports of abuse or neglect concerning the same provider, what are the next steps or actions taken? Is that any different?
So what we've done just recently is we have completely revamped our case management system, and we have a very robust relational system now where when a case comes in, we can look to see, hey, how many other cases were at this residence? Was this alleged abuser alleged to have done something similar to somebody else or to this victim again? And so we're really using this technology to be able to identify if we do see multiple reports coming from a particular location. Sometimes that can mean because the folks that are working there are doing their job as mandated reporters and they're calling those in. Sometimes we're more concerned about places that we think should be reporting and we're not hearing from. So it's a little bit of a double-sided coin, but we are in a position now, and we're only getting better at this, to kind of recognize trends, and we'll take some action. So if we see that a location is not reporting, we may contact Victoria's unit and say, hey, listen, we want you to go out there. We want you to offer mandated reporter training, which they do anyhow routinely. But we say, you know what, we think we'd like you to go on site. Can you reach out to them and see if they would like that kind of training? So we're kind of being more proactive with technology than we've ever been able to.
Thank you. So does DPPC publish an annual report detailing substantiated cases of abuse and neglect in congregate care and day services?
So we do have an annual report, and you can access that on our DPPC website, and that will give you a really great idea of all the units within the DPPC and the activities that have been done. I don't know, Victoria, if you can pop that into the chat. And it is broken down somewhat into types of cases, but maybe not at the level that this individual might be searching for. But I would encourage you to take a look at the annual report. And if you think there's additional information that you're looking for, and it could be part of a public, records request, please certainly fill out the form and we'll provide you whatever we can that's not confidential.
And you may have already answered this one. Does the caller get a call back once it's screened in and assigned to a caseworker? So if somebody reports, you don't automatically get a call back, right?
Well, if a case is screened in, one of the first things that an investigator is going to want to do is speak to the reporter. They're the person who called the case in and knows the most information. So they should get a call from an investigator if the investigation is screened in. If it's screened out, they will not get confirmation that it was screened out.
Okay. And I think Patricia might be referencing a specific case that I know she could reach out to you separately, but I thought she's saying if a DPPC investigator is impartial, why send a DDS investigator if the file in harasser, the alleged harasser, is DDS? Does that happen?
So by law and the way the statute was designed is that we can assign cases to investigators that work specifically on our cases and some of their internal cases from DDS, DMH, and Massability. And honestly, that was done. This is a very, very small organization when it was first created. And we had folks that worked for DDS, DMH, Massability who had expertise in working with that population. They are also impartial. They're investigators. They have an ethical obligation to look at these cases objectively, and they certainly do. We will have cases that come in and they are substantiated by a DDS investigator on a DDS staff. So their job is to be impartial. And we have an oversight office here that is involved in all of the cases that are investigated. So DPPC has its hand in all the investigations, always.
And what can you do if you don't receive information from DPPC after working with an investigator?
So like I said, you can request a copy of 19C investigation report. You can do that online. You do it through DPPC records. There's a link on our website to do that. And when the investigation is concluded, you will receive a redacted copy of that report if you're entitled to that information.
I don't know if that covers it for you, Patricia, or if you had anything else you wanted to say, but I think we can move on to the next one. What should we do if we call in a DPPC report or receive a disposition and believe that an internal inquiry should begin immediately? At times, DPPC investigators express concern and instruct us not to conduct an internal inquiry while their investigation is underway. Our first priority must always be to assess potential safety risks and take immediate action.
So, and I would agree with that as your first priority. Your first priority as a vendor or an employer is to make sure that your folks are safe. We do not want to get in the way of you ensuring that that's the case. We do want to make sure that the investigations are able to take place by the DPPC. So in other words, that an internal investigation wouldn't actually interfere with the DPPC investigation, but what we tell our investigators is they should work with the agencies, and I think they do this actually very well to help set up witness, when they speak to witnesses, what time they're meeting them, where they're meeting them, so that their staff isn't kind of sent in two separate directions. So we need to be able to do an objective investigation, but we also recognize that you need to keep your folks safe on the ground, and we do not want or request that you be prevented from doing that. But we do try to work with you so that we can ensure that our investigation is objective and there isn't interference with that.
And I want to be cognizant of people's time. There's a few more questions. Diane, I'm going to ask these last two, and then if you scroll down to the bottom ones to see if there's other pressing ones we should bring up. Is there a support group for parents regarding this subject? I know you talked a lot about trauma informed care training, things like that. Are there supports for parents around these type of issues?
I would say there are a lot of support type groups. I mean, I think the ARC has support systems in place. If it's like a sexual assault, or our navigators will kind of reach out and provide resources for those particular types of abuse. We don't have sort of a support group that's run by the DPPC, but we certainly have resources that we could direct you to depending on where you live. Paths to Healing, and there are a myriad of organizations who provide some type of support, and we'd be happy to share those resources.
And maybe that's under your resources section of your website.
Yes,
I see Victoria nodding. Two other quickies on my end. This person writes that was reported a case that involved an individual hit in the eye, which resulted in a badly bruised black eye. The report stated it was not a serious injury. How is serious injury defined?
So a serious injury, and this is a question that we often get from folks. What does that mean? And it really has to be something that impacts your ability to function in a way. or it can be a bruise. I'm not sure that this bruising is can be a very serious injury, but there's a level of bruising. For example, you could bruise yourself and just get a small, discoloration because you've hit your elbow against something. We couldn't possibly investigate all the things that come in as possible injuries. So when the organization was established, they said, we need you to focus on a serious injury. We also have a category of abuse per se, where that requirement is dispensed with in certain categories. And that's like a sexual assault. You don't need to have an injury if that. So there's a various cases, but that again is all like laid out on our website. You can just go right to the definitions in the regulations. That explains exactly how it's defined. But it was done because we had to focus. There had to be some way initially to focus on those really serious cases because there just wasn't the bandwidth to not be able to look at those first and foremost.
Great, thank you. Diane, I don't know if any other ones jumped out that I may have missed or Julie missed.
Did you cover the one regarding video cameras in group homes?
Oh, no.
Okay, so some group homes have video cameras in a common living areas, but some agencies do not want to install. Some of them said because workers don't want to. Does it depend on the agency? But there was another one regarding cameras in the home where it states DDS does not want them, citing human rights concerns.
So I am just going to answer that question very generally. I'm not the expert on that. What I will say is there is kind of a balance that has to be reached between folks who live in a group setting and having some privacy, and the ability for people to be able to protect their loved ones with cameras. And I will say from our perspective, we love cameras because we find it as it's a great deterrent. And if something has actually occurred and it's on video, I mean, a picture speaks louder than words. So, but there are human rights considerations that make some of those cameras in certain locations restricted.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And in closing, I just like to again thank our sponsors, as well as special thanks to our presenters, Julie and Victoria, for this informative presentation. I also want to thank all of our attendees for spending their precious time with us and remind you to please take a few minutes and complete that feedback survey. We really look at them and we make adjustments and take your suggestions seriously about future topics. Our next webinar is Innovative Housing for People with Disabilities on Wednesday, December 17th at 12. And finally, just happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And thank you again for your time. Bye.
Thank you so much for having us. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.